and welcome to Project Merlin, the podcast about the darkest secrets in Britain's history. I'm investigative journalist Susie Boniface, and in a special project at the University of Liverpool, I'm delving into the biggest ever declassification of nuclear records to get closer to the truth that lies behind decades of government cover-up. Now, my colleague and usual co-host, Dr. John Hogg, can't be with us today, so I'm flying solo for once with the help of producer Mike. And our guests today are two people who know all about state cover-ups. First, we have Charlotte Hennessy, who's one of the campaigners among the families affected by the Hillsborough disaster, which we'll be discussing in a bit of detail later on. Welcome, Charlotte. And also Professor Lydia Hayes, Principal Convener at the Centre for People's Justice at the University of Liverpool, which is helping to support this joint research project. Welcome, Lydia.
Thanks. Hi, Susie.
Now, our usual COA for listeners, the interpretations and opinions expressed on this podcast will differ. They are the personal views of individual guests. They do not necessarily reflect the position of the University of Liverpool. So let's get into it then. So a quick recap. For those who may not have heard all our previous episodes, the Merlin database is a cache of 28,000 top secret documents held by the Atomic Weapons Establishment. It was built to hold all the information government had about the radiation exposure of troops at our Cold War weapons tests. Now, the Ministry of Defence has always denied that these 40,000 men came to any harm. But my 20-year investigation with the Mirror newspaper has uncovered a massive programme of medical monitoring. Blood, urine and thyroid tests were conducted along with x-rays before, during and after servicemen were exposed to nuclear fallout. And the results of this human experimentation, there is no other word for it, are now missing from the veterans' medical files. All of this was unlawfully locked behind national security, and courts and judges and parliament were told repeatedly that they simply didn't exist. Now, the discovery of these orders led to some instructions to declassify Merlin, and the files that we're now able to look through and we've reviewed so far are supporting the veterans' long-held beliefs that they were the guinea pigs in a radiation experiment. Now, this scandal is now at the point where police are reviewing evidence of crimes by public officials in orchestrating the cover-up. And we have an internal government records review, which has lasted 22 months so far. And we're promised it will report back before summer recess, which was going to be on July the 17th, 2026, which is in about 3 weeks' time as we are recording this today. And the veterans who survive have an average age of 87. So as it always has been, time is running out. Now, we're recording this on June the 22nd. And this morning, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, who ordered that Merlin be opened, has resigned. And it is widely expected he's going to be succeeded by Andy Burnham, who, as Mayor of Greater Manchester, was very supportive of the nuclear veterans. He lent his weight to their campaign. He came with us to present a dossier of evidence to the police, and he's been bang alongside them in the past few years as the nuked blood scandal has gathered pace. One of the things he did very early on when we first met him was he introduced nuclear veterans to the Hillsborough families and their campaign for a law to stop future cover-ups. One of the things he said to us, Charlotte, was, we sat and met him and Steve Rotherham, the Mayor of Liverpool, and they said, this is exactly the same as Hillsborough. This is exactly the same. This is the state playbook of cover-up. And so, Charlotte, I just want to pause for a moment and recap for people who weren't around in 1989 or who weren't paying attention. Perhaps they've long forgotten it. Hillsborough was a football stadium in Sheffield, which was hosting an FA Cup semi-final. Now, your dad, James, was in the crowd that day. He was one of the fans, wasn't he? What happened to him?
So just first and foremost, I think it's important that I just explain that I can only speak on behalf of myself. Hillsborough happened when I was 6. So the journey that other family members went on is very different to mine, and they lay a lot of the foundations for me to be able to find out what actually did happen to my dad at Hillsborough. So my dad was a season ticket holder. He always went to games, home and away. And from what I've managed to piece together is that he travelled to the game on the coach like he usually did from the Sutton Way pub in Ellesmere Port where we lived. He entered the ground via a turnstile. I've still got his ticket stub to be honest. He followed all the right channels and was in pen 3. I think it's probably important to highlight that that ground was chosen as it was deemed as to be, you know, a sort of a mutual travel distance for both sets of fans. So for Liverpool fans and for Nottingham Forest fans. But the problem started where, you know, Liverpool Football Club were a much bigger club than Nottingham Forest at that time, and they had a bigger fan base. So there was already concerns before the fixture had even gone ahead because of the ground allocation. LFC were given the smaller area of the stadium, which was the Leppins Lane end and the West Stand. So there were already concerns aired by Liverpool fans about that allocation to begin with, and then the story sort of, it gets a little bit personal in terms of South Yorkshire Police Force, because that ground had always been policed by Chief Superintendent Mole, and he'd policed many a football game there. And then, due to like an internal argument or disagreement, he was removed from post, and Duckenfield came in behind and took that role.
This is David Duckenfield. He was the match commander for the
That's
day,
right.
for South Yorkshire Police.
Yeah. So he then took over, you know, the role of Mole, if you like, and was responsible for all match commands at that ground. And it's sort of, when you look back, it feels you kind of you've got a human element yourself when you're learning about things as you're growing up. And so, you know, he wasn't experienced at that ground. But I hate this narrative that he didn't have the tools or the knowledge, because he was actually a very experienced police officer and had been a police officer at that time for, I think it was about 25 years. So he was, you know, a well-experienced, very knowledgeable, very skilled officer, which is why he was given that role. But he didn't familiarise himself with the layout, with the safety policies, with previous safety and planning procedures that were already in place. And those were in place to ensure that when fans did attend the grounds, there were systems in place. So just for example, filtering systems outside of the Leppins Lane end, because it was known to be a bottleneck. So Duckenfield didn't use any of those. It was almost as if, in my opinion, it was almost as if he was of the view that, you know, we're going to do things my way now, and this is how we're going to do it. The consequence of that was, at the Leppins Lane end, the Liverpool fans had originally 23 turnstiles. And then, for reasons that I've never really been able to understand, on the morning of the fixture, they took away turnstiles and left all those Liverpool fans with 7 turnstiles to get through. So that then naturally created a delay and a build-up of fans outside of the ground. Outside of the ground, you've got experienced officers, one of them being Superintendent Marshall, who had policed that ground on many, many occasions. And so I think once he realised that there was an issue, he started calling over the radio to David Duckenfield, who was in the police control box, that something needed to happen, because of, you know, there was a potential crushing outside of the ground. So again, David Duckenfield was in the police control box, which is located inside the grounds. It's actually still there now. And I've been to visit it, and I was really, really shocked at how small the police control box is and just how much of a view you can have. So now, you know, it's all seated. So it kind of makes your view feel a little bit clearer because you can see individual seats. But then if I was to try and put myself in that control box in 1989 and think it's these pens, so there was pens 1 and 2, which the control box is sort of immediately over, and then you've got pens 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6. So from where they were positioned, David Duckenfield undoubtedly had a clear view. He would have been able to have seen what everybody else could see, in that there was thousands of fans in one space, and that it didn't make sense. So he's then got, calls on the radio, you need to open a gate, you need to relieve the pressure outside, but also whilst looking at pens 3 and 4, which are already congested, he hasn't put the two together. He hasn't questioned, why are these fans all going into those pens, and then gave an order for the gates to be opened.
So this is at one end of the stadium, the Leppings Lane end, where the Liverpool fans are coming in. You've got these two pens that are right on the end of the pitch, 3 and 4. And because this is the days before seating was mandatory, they're surrounded by wire fences. They're just concrete terraces with wire around them. And they're literally, it's a pen, like a zoo pen. And the people are pushed into it from the top. And then on the corners of each pitch, there's another few pens on either side of these main ones. And there were fewer people in there. So he would have been able to see those central pens were getting congested, and he was getting these calls to open the gates up, which he did. He let them in.
He did, yeah. So he, I think, the focus has always been on Gate C, but there were actually 2 other gates opened as well. But Gate C was, being the main one, because that meant that. So Gate C, I think whenever we say gate, we visualize, a garden gate that we open and we close. That's not what Gate C was like. It was this huge metal gate. It's massive. And it's sort of built into the wall section. It's like the end of a wall. And then it joins onto terraces. So to open Gate C, you've got to pull it. And like I say, it's absolutely massive. So I think it was actually stewards, but we might need to fact check that. I think it was actually stewards, though, that opened Gate C on the instruction of whatever it was that they'd heard over the radio. And so naturally, because of the build-up outside, fans came through Gate C. And again, if you've never been to the ground, it's difficult to visualise. But, Hillsborough is a really small ground in terms of, if take away thinking of Anfield or somewhere as big as the Etihad Stadium, Hillsborough is so small. So if you were to go through those gates, and again, then in 1989, signage was really poor. So there was no filtering system. There were no police officers or stewards on the other side, directing people. It's pens 1 and 2 this way, 3 and 4 that way down the tunnel. Everybody just sort of followed the flow and down into the tunnel because, again, if you've been there, you would know it's just the logical thing to do. It just totally makes sense to just go that way. It seems that it's the only entrance onto that terrace. So that's what people did. And unfortunately, again, for reasons that we've never really understood, there was sort of like overflow gates at the back of the pens. They were there. They were supposed to be, again, another filtering system so that fans could find their own level. So if there was too many people in one area and I didn't feel very comfortable, I would have been able to have moved freely into pens 1 and 2. But those gates were locked. And so that filtering system was unable to have been actioned. So more and more people just kept coming down the tunnel, and the pens just, 3 and 4 were just getting more and more packed. And so what we were able to discover is that initially, like I say, my dad went through a turnstile. He was there when he should have been at the time that he should have been. And the initial footage that we've got is that he is at the back of pen 3, almost by that gate that would have allowed him to filter into pens 1 and 2. And then all of a sudden, he's gone from being at the back right corner all the way down, as if I just think the surge, just the surges of people has just carried him. And then I've never ever found out how. I'm going to assume that he climbed out of the pen. But again, that was really difficult for fans because the fences came right up and then sort of over as well. Yeah. And then they were met with some police officers who were pushing them back in and not allowing them to climb out. Yeah. And so from what I know, and the evidence that's been heard at the inquest, is that my dad was found just behind the goal by a police officer who was, incredible on the day. And he's been incredible ever since, to be honest. If ever I've had any questions along the way, I've always just been able to email and ask him, and he will always be very honest with me. So my dad was, very much so alive. He was raising an arm. He was clearly asking for help. And he was taken to the gym by that police officer, by a St. John ambulance volunteer, it is believed, and by firemen. And when he was placed in the gym, they thought that he was going to get the medical assistance that he needed, because the gym had been set up to take the injured too, as a sort of a bit of a triage, if you like.
So this is the gymnasium at the ground, the ones that
at the ground, yeah.
The footballers would normally have used. They didn't have any other facilities, didn't have medical rooms or anything like that set up. So they just very hurriedly said, right, take everyone to the gymnasium. And they were hoping that some ambulances were going to be able to get to the gymnasium and take up the worst or whatever. But that didn't happen to your dad.
No, well, I don't think it happened to a majority of the 97. So, yeah, they placed my dad in the gym as they were instructed to by another police officer. And, really sadly, that's where my dad was just left. Nobody came to check his condition. Nobody came to see, if he was still, signs of life or anything like that. 2 other police officers then came along, placed my dad in a body bag. That's where he was left for at least an hour. Those 2 police officers were then instructed to search, because they were allocated a body each. And there was 2 officers that were instructed to search my dad for ID. When they opened the body bag, they noted that my dad had actually vomited inside. But, I mean, being realistic, we know that it's a natural process for the human body to sort of, when someone's passing away, it does sort of relieve itself of any bodily contents. And I'm very realistic that is a normal process when somebody is dying. However, my concern was the fact that they noted that my dad was very hot and sweaty. And I didn't find that out until the Hillsborough Independent Panel released their report, and I had access to all of those statements.
So he was still alive in that body bag. The evidence would imply that he was not dead when they put him in there.
That's right. Yeah. So for me, bearing in mind that Hillsborough families had been fighting for many, many years before I, obtained that knowledge. There'd been failed private prosecutions. There'd already been an inquest. There'd been the Lord Justice Taylor inquiry. And all of those different things had told me, the Lord Justice Taylor inquiry told me that it wasn't fan behaviour and that the fans weren't at fault and that South Yorkshire Police Force had failed within their duty. And then the inquests, the original inquests, told me, well, your dad died as a result of an accident. He was dead by 3:15, and that he was killed. His cause of death was traumatic asphyxiation. Then there was the Stuart Smith scrutiny that told me that there was no cover-up and there was no grounds to reopen anything and have another inquiry. So by the time the Hillsborough Independent Panel released their report, I was done with people telling me what had happened. I wanted to know for myself. So I used to sit and go through all the documents, every statement that I could find, I would sit and read, and we made a timeline. And that was then what I presented to my legal team and said, this is what I've been able to find. But at that time, the difference was that I didn't have access to the CCTV footage or anything like that, which that came later via Operation Resolve.
So there's this trauma of what happened to your dad on the day, and then presumably your family not knowing what's happened, knowing there's been a disaster, everyone, all the Liverpool fans having to, some of them rushing to Hillsborough trying to identify the dead in this gymnasium. And then we had, in the immediate aftermath, I think I was 12 when Hillsborough happened. I remember seeing it unfold on the news. We had all this stuff with people because there was the context, wasn't there, of there having been other football hooliganism at different matches, and people decided that was what had started here. There was this assumption that because they had seen people trying to climb over these fences, that they were trying to have a pitch invasion. It took a while for the help to kick in as a result, and then when people did realise that there was something amiss going on, they were trying to open those gates, they were trying to get the medical care there. It was slow, it was difficult to get it there. And then afterwards, the police was trying to blame the fans. They were saying, well, look, they were pushing. Look, there was too many of them at the turnstiles. Look, they'd all been to the pub first, things like this. And they were trying to say that the Liverpool fans were drunk and they were even allegations they were trying to battle the police and stop them giving assistance and everything else. And through all of this, you've got to go through the paperwork yourself. You're being the one who's got you and the other families, you've all got your own responsibilities to find the truth, because there's all these different panels and inquests and inquiries saying it's one thing or another thing. And you must have been incredibly, I suppose at times, gaslit or confused, where you're going, well, am I imagining it? Are they right? We keep hearing different things, and you're having to sit there and put all the evidence together yourself. And you must have felt like you were battering your head against a brick wall, really, or against the British state. Yeah.
I think that, for me, once the Hillsborough Independent Panel's report was released, that reality was that it was like Hillsborough had just happened. And it's when I look back, it's awful. I was so sick of these. I very quickly realised that all these people that were telling me, this is what happened to your dad. No, it's not. This is what happened to your dad. And then there was that awful news article from the Sun newspaper that, and I was just so done with, I quite clearly can't trust any of these people because they're all telling me different things. So we're not going to listen to them. We're going to do our own research. I am going to find out for myself what happened to my dad, and nobody else will be able to tell me anything different because I've got the evidence here. And that has been since then, that, has always been my mindset. So I'm very quick to fact check people. I'm very, I am met with criticism of, well, your dad wasn't really alive in the body bag, was he? Well, he was, because medical experts have proved it. So nobody can tell me anymore. No, there's so many different people that have abused their positions of power that I have got that control now. I've got my dad's facts, and they cannot be covered up any longer. So It is like being gaslit, but it's also just very quickly realizing, as a society and as a country, we're told that police officers and ambulance personnel are there to protect us. But one of the hardest things for me to accept was there was 41 ambulances deployed to that ground, and instead of letting ambulances in, they got police dogs and lined police dogs up on the pitch, whilst Liverpool fans are screaming that their friends are dying and carrying bodies across the pitch on advertising hoarding. There's very clearly something wrong, and still all of those professionals failed to act, including the most senior ambulance officers that were there at the ground. They walked right along the terraces, could see that people were fighting for their lives and very visibly crushed up against the fences, and went and tended to someone who's got a broken leg. So it was just shocking, and it's definitely shaped, the person that I am, and my sort of pathway in life, if you like, because I feel that once you have opened that can of worms, that there are people out there, professionals out there that will always put themselves before what is right for those who are the victims, that duty then falls on you to make sure that you are heard and that other victims are heard and that they're prepared for any potential fight that they have coming their way.
That's a massive weight, though, Charlotte. And you were 6
it is
when this
sometimes
happened to your dad. It's a huge responsibility to take on. And well done you for doing it. Although I know you probably feel you didn't have much choice in the end. It sounds like you were, taking ownership of your dad back from this horrible tragedy.
I was just, because I honestly, I used to be so angry, because you'd just be like, well, how can someone, one thing that I will never ever accept, and I will never try to understand, I don't even let my brain go there, is that even in the most vulnerable state of having a pathology, having an autopsy and a pathology report written up, the pathologist lied to fit in with the original coroner, Dr. Popper, his inquest. He lied about the state and the condition of my dad to fit in with the cause of death of traumatic asphyxiation. And then when we had the second inquests, when the Hillsborough Independent Panel released their report, we had to go within days. It was very, very quick. Me, my mum, my 2 aunties had to go for a meeting with Dr. Bill Kirkup, who was also one of the panel members. And he had the truly awful job of having to tell us that he'd studied my dad's pathology and examined the results of that compared to things like the weight of his brain compared to the weight of his heart and visible potassium, and just taking all of those things into consideration. And he had to tell me that his original cause of death was untrue. And I can't, and I think, oh God, like at the time, I just kept on saying to him, what do you mean? I don't understand what you mean. So are you telling me that that's a lie as well? Like, is any of this, am I ever going to find out what actually happened to him? And for me, that's one of the things that I will never forgive. I think it's absolutely deplorable that a pathologist lied to make someone's cause of death fit in with that narrative. And now what we know, I feel like my dad was able to be put to rest after the second inquest, because we know that it was pure negligence. It was nothing to do with his own behaviours or the behaviours of any of his mates. His cause of death is now rightly noted as the inhalation of copious amounts of stomach content, and then, caused by gross negligence manslaughter. He was alive within that body bag, and he was unfortunately killed due to sheer negligence. And I don't hold that police officer responsible who found my dad on the ground, but I will never understand why the 2 police officers that searched him, they sat on that knowledge until Operation Resolve went to visit them in preparation for the second inquest. They watched me do public appeals. I was trying to I wanted to make sure that I had all the credible witnesses at the second inquest to be my dad's voice. So that included his friend who he travelled with, the police officer that found him on the pitch, and I wanted the St John ambulance guy because he could also verify my dad's state when they got to him initially. and where they left him. And those two officers will have watched me do all of those appeals. It was in every newspaper that you could think of, every media outlet that could put it on the news did. You know, people were great. They were really genuinely wanted to help. And they watched all of those appeals and said nothing. They said absolutely nothing until Operation Resolve went to visit them again. And that's when one of them disclosed, well, actually, I have always thought it was a bit strange that he was very hot. And, you know, so then again, even during the inquest process, when you think that you've got everything, he's like, you know, finally made an admittance. And then he was allowed to opt out of giving evidence on the basis that his mental health wasn't well enough.
Never mind the mental health of the people who were the victims of this horrible tragedy, the relatives and everything else, and what you've all been through. So there were these fresh inquests. There was attempts at private prosecutions, all sort of things failed along the way, but you had this new investigation, partly as a result of some of the stuff that I think Andy Burnham was doing in Parliament around that time, and other people. And then you had this second inquest. And one of the things I can remember Andy saying to me at one point when I first met him was that what the nuclear veterans need, he said, is their Hillsborough moment. And he was talking about that second inquest, the verdict of unlawful killing, which changed the narrative, accepted and vindicated the fans and the families' complaints all this time. What were your feelings when that moment came through? Did it feel like things had corrected themselves, or was it just was it a solution, or was it a step in the right direction? How did you feel about it?
It felt, at the time, it felt like a step in the right direction. All I've ever wanted really was truth for my dad. I just wanted to, you know, like I said, take back that sort of ownership. You know, he was my dad. I was his legal next of kin. And, you know, it's always been about being his voice so that he could be buried with the truth. And, you know, and maybe, I don't know, if there is some sort of afterlife, you know that we did find him in the end, if that makes sense. And that we didn't ever give up. Because it's horrible, you know, when I'm friends with Steve Pearce, who is also, you know, one of the members of Lab Rats. So I know his story quite well about, you know, his dad and what he's going through now. And it's honestly, sometimes it's awful. Like, he's just had lots of medical records released in relation to his dad. Half of them are redacted, or like he knows what should be in there and they're not. And it's when you're watching it, you've been on the receiving end of it, and then you're watching it happen to someone else who has now become a friend. It's really sad, but also it's like knowing those boundaries, that it's Steve's journey for his dad, and there's not, other than be supportive, there's not much really that I can do to change that. However, I can, you know, I can sort of advocate alongside them and campaign. And Andy's right, it is about making sure that they, you know, they do need that Hillsborough moment. But I have got to say, and I probably will get shot for saying this, I've noticed, since we've been on this Hillsborough Law Now journey, I've noticed a huge difference, that if a Hillsborough family member says they want to have a meeting with Keir Starmer, the diary's rolled out. If someone from Lab Rat says, when are we having this meeting? You promised us a meeting, when are we having it? They're completely ignored.
Yeah.
And in the
his diary's very full. His diary's very busy. He suddenly can't find the time. Yeah.
But it's, you know, I've just noticed that there are campaigners, and I'm not knocking our campaigners, you know, I'm an advocate for all of them, but I have noticed that there is a difference between lab rats and nuclear test veterans. It's just like nobody wants to go near them, and then Keir will say all these really lovely words on the TV and nothing materializes from it. But I think in the space that Keir pledged to meet with Steve and others, I think I've seen the Prime Minister 4 times in that time.
Yeah, I think the difference is that obviously what happened at Hillsborough is now officially accepted.
Yeah.
And what's happened with the nuclear veterans, with Steve's dad, who was at the minor trials, is still technically a bone of contention for the government. So one of the things that we get with nuclear veterans is people often say to me, well, what do they want? What do they want out of this scandal? And the answer is always, well, they all want something different, because they were affected in different ways about different things. Some people lost a breadwinner, some had disabled children, some had, long-term chronic illness to deal with and stuff. There isn't this one size fits all solution. But the one thing that every veteran agrees on, and that every family member, and they always say to me, it's the same thing you just said, Charlotte, was that they want the truth. So all they want, really, if they had nothing else, they just want to hear the words, yes, you were the lab rats in an experiment. And it seems that it's very similar for the Hillsborough families as well. So let's just move on a bit to the mechanics of how that works, how you get the truth out of the British state. So Lydia, this is very much a bit more your area of expertise. The Hillsborough families solution was this thing that Charlotte just referenced, the Hillsborough Law. That's what's become known as. Can you take us through it, explain how that works, and what kind of difference it makes to when you have public officials like the Charlotte there who know the truth but who don't feel compelled to tell anybody about it?
Yeah, I think what comes through really strongly from the Hillsborough story and what we know about Hillsborough is the extent to which there is clearly underlying prejudices about ordinary people that are running through engagement between public authorities and the public. That there was this assumptions being made about people being hooligans, assumption being made about members of the public being in the wrong, and the complete failure to listen in that moment of Hillsborough and the crush happening, and seeing how the exercise of public power by public officials, and by that we mean all sorts of people who work in public services and are in public office and serve the public, and the way in which that notion of serving the public isn't being matched with levels of accountability to the public. So the power that office holders have, whether they work in, it sounds quite grand, doesn't it? Public officials, public office holders, but we're talking about people who work in public services, in local authorities, in the police, in the prisons, in NHS hospitals, right up to the senior parts of the civil service, the Ministry of Defence, the security services. They're all holding public power in order to serve the public, and yet the law is not working in a way to ensure that there is public accountability when it's needed. And where Charlotte there is talking about that really shocking experience and events that happened in relation to the coroner and what she called just then lying to fit in, that is an issue to do with culture. This is not something where there is a problem with individual bad apples. This is showing where there is a culture which runs inside public authorities and across public authorities, where this lying to fit in has happened over and over again. So it's not just Hillsborough. It's not just in relation to the struggles of the nuclear test veterans. It's so many of these enormous disasters and scandals that have taken place throughout, the decades, where they are seared into the public memory. We know about, the infected blood scandal, and the cover-ups and the abuse of power and the lack of accountability, the Post Office Horizon scandal, the Grenfell Tower fire, the lies that were told by the security services in relation to the Manchester Arena terror attack, and the way in which so many mistakes were made that led up to those terrible events, the forced adoption scandal, where young women in mother and baby institutes were told lies about the circumstances that they were in and what the right thing to do was, and to have their children removed from them days after they were born, and then be unable to know what happened to those children or why they were treated so cruelly. And these scandals and disasters go on with this same pattern about public power without public accountability, and the inability of our legal systems to effectively get to truth and justice, which is, we can say that's all people are looking for, is truth and justice. But we can't have justice without truth. And justice is fundamental to the ability for the public to have trust in institutions that govern us. So these scandals and disasters, which are seared into our collective public memory, our understanding of our recent British history and culture, they are about what it means to be a citizen in this country, what it means to be a member of the public. It is about the effective functioning of democracy and the way in which law is working, which is why it's so important to have the Hillsborough Law, the Public Office Accountability Bill, brought into force, because it is a law that is about law. It's a law that's about making the law work better so that there is this accountability, because the law has not been working properly. It's made it so that it's not been possible to get to the truth efficiently when the levers are pulled, when there have been inquests and inquiries. We still haven't got to the truth, or they have taken ages and ages and ages, and we know that they cost millions of pounds worth of public money, and it's because the law hasn't been strong enough. So what the Public Office Accountability Bill is about is massively important in terms of a step forward to restore, hopefully, some trust over the longer term between the public and public authorities. And that's because of a number of measures in the Public Office Accountability Bill, which are about something which is called candour. And candour is the heart of the Public Office Accountability Bill. And candour means being open and transparent and frank in terms of communication and access to information between the public and public authorities. And it's a very constitutionally significant piece of law which is being developed through the bill, because it operates at so many different levels of the state. So it is about, yes, what happens at the highest level of the civil service and accountability of ministers who hold public office right at the top of government, but all the way through the court system, the inquest and inquiry system, right down through to the everyday operation of public officials and public servants across the UK. And so introducing a duty of candour at all times. So it's not just about when things have gone wrong, how we have a more effective legal system for getting to the truth. It's not just about making it so that ordinary members of the public have got better support through the legal infrastructure to be able to get to the truth. It's also about what happens before things go wrong, what happens in terms of trying to be more protective, more aware of serving the public. So the bill is doing that through setting out the requirement for all public authorities, so this is something which binds about 6 million people who work across public authorities and public services. And that's really important to kind of get in our minds, that this is not about us and them, because people who work in public office, it's so, it's such a big part of the landscape of the UK. Ourselves or our friends or our neighbours or our family, we're all in contact with somebody who is affected by the Public Office Accountability Bill. And so if we take the sorts of things that Charlotte is talking about there in terms of inquests and inquiries, so this is after something has gone wrong and the formal levers have been pulled to say, right, we now need to bring everybody together and to use the court system to get to the truth. It introduces something called a duty of candour and accountability, which means that public authorities have to set out their position at the beginning of an inquiry. So they have to say what it is that they know. And they have to make sure that the information is provided to whoever is chairing that inquiry. And what the Public Office Accountability Bill is doing is not only making it so that those organisations have to come clean about what they know at the beginning of inquiries, they make it so that the people who are within those public authorities and those who lead them are personally accountable for the behaviour of the public authority and for their behaviour themselves when they are giving when they're giving evidence and when they are interacting with these public inquiries.
That's the critical thing, isn't it? That's the bit where, where those two police officers who knew that Charlotte's dad was a bit warm when they put him in the body bag, because they had this urge to fit in with the institution, which had gone along with this idea and the story that it was all the fans' fault. David Duckenfield, when he first was asked about it on the match day, said, "Oh, the fans forced the gate," even though he had opened it. And that just kind of meant everyone else underneath him in the force kind of also like, "Oh, that's the story, that's the line we're taking." And it went that way for 2 decades or more. So by giving them a duty of candour, it means those people at the bottom of the chain of command, because they're personally responsible for what they've done, they would have the opportunity and the reason and the compunction to speak up and say, no, actually, I didn't think that was the right thing to do. And people higher up the chain, therefore, can't really order someone else to go and change their notes as they did at Hillsborough and alter the official story in the same way, and because it's backed up by criminal penalties, isn't it? So if you don't tell the truth, you go to jail.
Yes, and that's critically important. So that duty of candour and assistance, so the duty not only to be open and transparent and frank, but actually your role as a public official is to assist the inquiry, not to turn up for weeks on end and say, "Oh, I don't remember, I don't recall, oh, my WhatsApp message, my phone's gone missing, my WhatsApp messages aren't there," or whatever it kind of might be. That they have a duty to assist the inquiry. And if they don't do that, and if they unreasonably disrupt the proceedings or make it so that it takes longer than it ought to, then that is a criminal offence to breach the duty of candour and assistance. And so those people would face the prospect of up to 2 years in prison. So that having that kind of hard legal backup behind this piece of law, which is about changing the culture of how inquests and inquiries happen, that use of the criminal law is really important. And furthermore, in relation to Hillsborough and other events where there have been mass killings, which have happened as a consequence of poor conduct across public authorities, there is a further criminal offence of the breach of the duty to prevent death or serious injury, which also potentially could have been very useful in relation to Hillsborough and in increasing that accountability kind of pressure, because failure to comply with that duty to prevent death or serious injury, that carries a prison sentence of up to 14 years. So, that idea of serving the public, of being accountable for the decisions that you are taking at the time you make those decisions, and then knowing that the legal process is there in order to ensure accountability and transparency is extremely important as that kind of layer of the Public Office Accountability Bill in terms of what happens at inquests and inquiries. And it should mean that these inquiries don't take so long and they don't cost so much money, and that they do properly serve the public interest of getting to the truth. Because when mistakes are being made, it's really important that organisations own up to the fact that those mistakes have been made, because that's how we all learn how to improve. Being honest about mistakes that we make not only is good for us as individuals in terms of learning from the past and thinking about how to do things better, that's also true for organisations. So if organisations are not owning up to the fact that they've made mistakes, if their gut reaction, which it too often appears to be, is to hide and to cover up, then we never get into this culture of actually improving the way in which these public authorities are serving the public and protecting the public. So that's a really important part of the Public Office Accountability Bill. There are also measures within the Public Office Accountability Bill which introduce a general duty of candour. So this is a duty on all public authorities to introduce codes of ethics and a duty of candour at all times by all who work with them. So another thing which is really important to say is that the Public Office Accountability Bill not only applies to public authorities, it also has application where services have been subcontracted, which is a really important part of our public authority landscape nowadays. So many of these services even when we look at Grenfell, for example, the number of different organisations that were involved in the refurbishment of the tower. So it also applies to private organisations where they are fulfilling a duty where there is a public function to that duty or that service. So it has a really rounded view of who is within scope of the Public Office Accountability Bill, and also this general duty of candour at all times, which means that public authorities are going to need to maintain and promote high standards of ethical conduct, and to do that through the way in which they lead and the culture that they create within these organisations. So that's another part of the bill, and Charlotte and I are working together on a research project which is about looking at what the duty of candour needs to mean in practice as a duty to be open and frank and honest at all time in communication with the public right across the public services and public authorities. And that as well has a criminal element to it too. So there is a new criminal offence introduced through the Public Office Accountability Bill, which is the offence of misleading the public. So in those egregious cases where the public is misled with intention to mislead, that carries a potential prison sentence of up to 2 years. And there's another criminal offence, which is that of seriously improper conduct. And that's replacing a common law offence of misconduct in public office with something which is put into the Public Office Accountability Bill to be crystal clear about what seriously improper conduct actually means, who falls within the scope, and the fact that it carries a prison sentence of up to 10 years.
So all this is stuff which you teach your children when they're about 2. You tell the truth, you come clean quick, or you'll be in more trouble, kind of thing. But we haven't bothered to make sure that our institutions follow these basic rules. But we all know, if you can imagine, if you don't tell a 2-year-old these kind of basic stories, what kind of adult are you going to get at the end of it? You're going to get Donald Trump, aren't you, or someone even worse? And that's clearly what's happening with government. So we had this very simple law that's got lots of complex ramifications going on, but very simple requirements, which is just you tell the truth. And it was something which Keir Starmer in opposition promised, met with you a lot, Charlotte, and the other families, promised was going to be something that he was going to support. It went in his manifesto. It was described as like the only full fat promise that he was going to do. And then when he's come into office, it's kind of got delayed. We're 2 years on now from when he took over, and it was going to be the thing he did on day one. It didn't really start for a year, and then it kind of got mired on lots of departmental arguing and wrangling, because everything that Lydia has just so well laid out for us about the penalties are the kind of things that all those in public office go, what? Please don't do this to me. This is going to make things awkward. So we have this situation now where it's, you've been kind of offered the slingshot. Everyone can be David versus Goliath. All right, you're still fighting Goliath, but you have a parity of arms. You have a fighting chance of standing your corner. But it's been mired, all this argument and meetings. Every time I talk to SPADs about it, this advisors in Parliament, they say, oh, they're having lots of meetings about it. We're doing this. Right, okay, but a meeting is not just passing the bill, which is what needs to happen. And it's the security service, isn't it, who lie, as we know, as Lydia mentioned there, the Manchester Arena bombings, terror attacks. They told a judge that they hadn't had any warning about that when they did. There's also the Beth case, as it's known, a woman whose boyfriend was a neo-Nazi, but he was also a double agent working for MI5, and they said he was nothing to do with them, said so publicly, said so in court as well. And later, the Director General of MI5 had to apologise because they'd lied under oath. So we do know that James Bond and his lot lie, and it's not just, I think the public, when they hear about this, they think, well, the security services, they need to lie. They need to not tell us the truth. We can't have them telling the truth about everything. We'll have a daily panic on our hands. So, but the bill is not about, or it doesn't say in it anyway, that the security services have to give up all their secrets. It just says when you do go to court, when you are in front of a judge or an inquest or tribunal, that's when you do tell the truth, lads. Because if you're having to put something out in public, you're compelled to tell the truth about it. And there's one document, well, there's several actually of these on Merlin that we found, but there's one in particular we found on Merlin that I wanted to share with you and our listener today. Now, the title of this document on Merlin is listed as, and I quote, Public Record Office retained by department under Section 3, brackets 4, Group Class ES1, Piece 956, and it's dated July 1997. Now, I can find in the National Archives what the real title of this document is, and it is called The Minor Trials at Maralinga, and it's dated 1958. Now, these are the trials that Steve Peirce, who was one of our previous episodes, his dad David was at, Steve, who's Charlotte's friend. These were a series of radioactive experiments on bomb components, which didn't go nuclear, but they did make the South Australian outback one of the most contaminated places on Earth. In 1958, the particular trials they were doing was hundreds of different experiments on bomb components, so triggers, cores, compression tests, which involved lots of toxic, poisonous, radioactive heavy metals just being spread about the countryside to see what happened. Now, we don't know what the actual contents of the file are, because although we can work out the title, we know it's about the minor trials, every single page of it is redacted. They all have these placeholders in it, which says this page has been withheld under Section 3(4) of the Public Records Act 1958. That's the national security exemption, which says we don't have to publish this because it's national security, which is a lovely blanket you can hide things under. Lydia, as an academic, as a researcher, going through various files and stuff, what did you think when you saw this file? I mean, every single page, apart from the title, every single page is hidden and covered up.
I think it must be so frustrating for those families and for servicemen themselves to see that information which is about what they were exposed to, issues to do with their own medical records or those of their family, just dealt with in such a blanket way. And the fact that there is now such a degree of lack of trust in the redaction process, because these documents are not only held by the UK state, they're also held by the Australian state in some cases where, for example, there's been correspondence between them. So what may have been redacted in one place is not necessarily redacted in another. And there are so many of these documents that they're not always filed in the right places. So there's so much evidence, as you've uncovered, Susie, where there are chinks where we begin to see and we begin to know as a matter of fact that the national security exemptions are not always being used for the right reasons. There is just a blanket use of, no, we're just going to decide that you can't see any of this lot. And so that idea of all of these officials are actually serving the public. National security is supposed to serve our interests and to protect us. And so having this information hidden from us and having that lack of confidence in how these powers are being exercised is deeply problematic. So I can only imagine how difficult this whole process is for those nuclear test veterans when this information is now coming to light, and we're seeing time and again that information, even information which is being heard in court, information which is being heard in some of the highest courts within the legal system, for example, the European Court of Human Rights, that it's beginning it's beginning to show itself as even information that is being presented there. It's not always completely accurate. It is not the full account, and so it's preventing the pursuit of truth and justice. And what I do want to say is that the use of the Official Secrets Act and protection of national security is, of course, incredibly important, and there is nothing in the Public Office Accountability Bill which is seeking to undermine the operations of the security services when they're on active operations. But it is that issue of when it comes to being accountable, of coming clean and talking to the public about what had happened, that's really important to know that information.
So, when we first saw this document, when it opened up and every single page is a placeholder, and I've seen a lot of redacted documents of national security in the course of my investigation. This is one of the stonkers, I've got to say, because even the page numbers are redacted. I can't even see the date it was written because it's national security. Don't be now. There is the assumption if there's one thing in here that can be redacted, the whole thing is redacted, as opposed to let's publish the whole thing and redact the bit that's needed to be redacted. But the really important bit for me is that this is on Merlin. So this is a database that was built in order to tell people what was going on, in order to share government knowledge in a legal case with the lawyers from the other side who had security clearance, who'd gone through developed vetting. and who were issuing, keywords to the Ministry of Defence to search Merlin for the files that they could then use for this court case. And if it was withheld on the grounds of national security from public view by the Atomic Weapons Establishment and the MOD, which was conducting these experiments on humans and on nuclear weapons at the time. It rediscovered the file. It put them on the database because it was being sued for about these experiments. That's all about legal disclosure, which we'll be talking about in another episode. But the government knows everything that's behind these redactions. The government knows everything that's redacted here. And all the solicitors could ever have known was that it had been redacted. They would never have known the truth. They never had access to it. And they'd have had to make a court application to view the file if they knew it existed, but they had to find it first. And the keywords, which, that there are little sort of tags that you put on the computer database on Merlin to search for it. And the keywords for this, and I kid you not, is not specified. Those are the two keywords that it has on it. So unless you are searching for the thing that is hidden and you know how it is hidden, you cannot find it to, actually get it out there and everything else. Even the people using Merlin on a daily basis at the Atomic Weapons Establishment, like to answer FOIs and everything else for queries from veterans, they wouldn't have ever found it either on their own searches because it's so big. And it ends up being covered up internally as well as externally. So no one outside can find it. And even the people inside the institutions don't know it's there anymore because it's been locked up so brilliantly. I mean, is this something that kind of happened at other cover-ups, Lydia, when you have, at Hillsborough, it takes so long for something to come out that in the end, the institutional knowledge actually gets erased as well. I mean, I'm sure Charlotte as well at South Yorkshire Police, by the time the truth came out at the inquests, they were police officers who said, oh, did we do that? And they had, people, the organisations responsible don't even have anyone who knows the truth anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, from I don't like really using the word victim, but from, a bereaved perspective, those types of lengths of cover up, they consume you. Because you cannot move on until you've had access to what it is that you're looking for, or to that document. And then your narrative. So just for example, you could have started out looking for that document just to know, okay, so what happened to Dad here? And then it becomes, okay, so why don't they want us to see it? What is it that you end up going down a completely different rabbit hole? And I think, so Keir Starmer's government are the ones that have started to use this, big scary phrase of national security. And it does, if you're on the outside looking in, it will make, and it has made, some of those that were initially supportive, it's made them panic a little bit.
About Hillsborough Law.
Yeah, about the Public Office Accountability Bill, because now, that it is giving them that food for thought of, well, intelligence agents should be protected to some level. They shouldn't have to be completely transparent. And we agree, we would never call for a law that would put others at risk. That's not what this is about. But I think, just referencing those documents that you're talking about there, we should be questioning, why is the intelligence service, why is the Ministry of Defence and MI5, why are they going to those lengths to stop us from seeing what it is that they don't want us to see? They clearly need the duty of candour more than most, because they move the goalposts all the time, and then when you think that you're onto a road of progress, you uncover documents like you have here, where, and I've seen them. I had a look over them again this morning, and it's not even sensical, is it? It's just blank pages that have been written on to tell us nothing. It doesn't explain why you can't have access to that document or why you can't see its contents. And I just think that, the pattern has continued even within this government, that Keir Starmer made a pledge of a public office accountability bill, and now all of a sudden we've got this unrest that it might jeopardise national security and we could potentially do something really damaging. And that's not the case at all.
Yeah, well, it's just see that MI5 actually sort of come round to the correct way of thinking. Perhaps if there's a new prime minister, we'll have to see, won't we? But national security is like it's as an exemption, it's still leaving a conveniently large bit of carpet for someone to bury something under if they want to. And we've got other documents that have got these kind of placeholders in for national security reasons. And when I've FOI'd them, I mean, when I FOI'd this, they said, well, it's vexatious and it's burdensome and we're doing other stuff and you can ask again a bit later. But on other documents, they've said, well, look, no, this particular document, it's redacted because it's about, the actual how you make the bomb, the initiators for the weapon. To which the response is, okay, well, that should clearly be national security, but why is it on the Merlin database, which was built to be about the health of nuclear veterans? Because the initiators of a weapon has nothing to do with whether or not the MOD is negligent. So they should never have been on Merlin, which means the whole Merlin itself cannot be trusted as a disclosure source for the case.
And it sort of defeats the object then, doesn't it?
Exactly. And you do start to suspect, because of all the other secrecy, you suspect that actually the really sensitive stuff has been put on Merlin to reverse engineer the fact that Merlin itself was locked down in its entirety, because so much of the rest of it is stuff that was completely not national security, should always have been published. So we yet to find out about some of those. I was told I could ask again about this one in October, so I've put it in my calendar and we'll see if we hear any more then. I suspect I'll be vexatious still in October. So a final word then on Hillsborough Law and the accountability bill. And I suppose the possibility, likelihood of a new prime minister. The last one has just resigned. We don't know quite who the new one will be, or if he's going to be any good, or what he's going to do when he's in office quite. But from both of you then, what do you think is going to happen now as we go forward? What's going to happen as far as this national security exemption and the Hillsborough Law? Do you think that, I suppose, the arguments that the security services make, that they need a kind of exemption, might be upheld, Lydia?
There's a couple of points that I wanted to make. In terms of disclosure of information, I think it's really instructive. The independent panel for Hillsborough that Charlotte was talking about was in 2012, and we knew at that point that there were 164 tampered witness statements. The police tampered with 164 witness statements, and we knew that in 2012, and that's shocking. But it wasn't until December of last year, 2025, with the Independent Office for Police Complaints report being published, that we then found that the true figure was that there were 327 fabricated statements. So, Hillsborough we're talking about back in 1989, and we've got just 6 months ago, we're finding this acknowledgement that actually the volume of this doctrine of witness statements was far higher. Nobody from the Hillsborough families is surprised by this, but that's where it enters the official record, if you like. And the other point I wanted to make was that the public often think that public officials means MPs, or public authorities means the government. But we're talking about the British state, and the British state as being the establishment, the accumulation of power, which rumbles on irrespective of which politicians happen to be forming the government at any particular point in time. They are two different things, the government and the state. And so this is why the Public Office Accountability Bill is so important, is because it's about holding the state to account. It's not about holding the government to account in that way, but only as a small part of the much broader and wider state. So holding MPs to account when they become ministers of state, and part of that massive apparatus. And I think that when we think about the peak points of the power of the state, that revolves around national security and the ability to be able to say, no one can see this because it's a matter of national security. And that being seen as the ultimate function of the state is, to keep the public safe. And this defence function that the state has, that it uses that power to keep things secret. And so the fact that the Public Office Accountability Bill is particularly contentious around holding the security services to account shouldn't be something that we're surprised by. It speaks to the power and importance of the Public Office Accountability Bill, that this is where the pinch point is. How accountable can the security services be made to the public, just to be let in, to know that the information that is being shared at inquiries like Spy Cops, like Manchester Arena inquiry, that they do tell the truth when they give evidence, and that they don't spin false narratives, which is what's been happening. And that's not acceptable, and that's not keeping the public safe.
No. And so, Charlotte, I mean, you've met Andy Burnham, you've met Keir Starmer during this long road to try to get to Hillsborough Law, which is obviously about keeping lots of other people safe and trying to prevent future tragedies and injustices. They strike me as both being fairly decent, well-intentioned men, but the first one was unable to get this across that final hurdle there that Lydia's talking about, that pinch point, the bit where it really sticks against the British state, that deep-rooted bit. Do you think that a new Prime Minister, whoever it may be, I suppose, but it's likely to be Andy Burnham, do you think that someone else could get it past that, or is the state always going to eventually be victorious?
I think this is one of our concerns as a Hillsborough Law Now campaign group, is that, this was Keir Starmer's pledge. It was in his mandate. So the onus is on him to fulfil this Public Office Accountability Bill before he resigns. Okay. The issue that we've then got is that the intelligence services aren't resigning. They're not going anywhere. So regardless of who the Prime Minister is, they're still going to be met with the same argument from the intelligence services as to why we can't have this Public Office Accountability Bill in its entirety. It has been frustrating along the way, because I do wish that there were times where I just wish Keir had been a little bit stronger and maybe not been so influenced by those that are around him. We also can't hide away from the fact that Shabana Mahmood is the Minister for MI5 and the Home Secretary, and she has continuously blocked this bill, continuously. Even when we've tried to meet with her to discuss what her concerns are in relation to the Public Office Accountability Bill and MI5, she's refused to. So it's already public knowledge that Andy is willing to have Shabana within his government, wherever that may be. And I just don't believe that a new Prime Minister, whether it's Andy or not, Andy is now a very close friend. I've got nothing but huge amounts of respect for him, compared to, I will never forget when he was invited to the memorial service and gave a speech. I was livid that a politician had been invited to speak at a memorial service.
This was the 20-year anniversary, wasn't it? It was 2009. He was the government minister. He was deputed to go. Yeah, and he gave a speech which
I had.
Go on, Charlotte.
So it was 2009, and I'd given birth to my second son 2 days before, which is the only reason why I wasn't at Anfield. Nobody knew that Andy was going to be speaking. And I remember saying to my mum, why the hell is a politician at a memorial service? And my mum said, if Margaret's arranged for a politician to come and speak at a memorial service, there'll be a damn good reason why. And she was right, you know, look at where we are now. So I've got nothing but huge amounts of respect to Andy. He is sincere. He does support campaigns. He does get things done. But I'm just not sure from, you know, a selfish perspective, if you like. We have done huge amounts of work with Keir's government, with his people, with his team. And when Keir goes, they go with him. So does the Attorney General, who is, you know, they all know this bill inside and out. And it's just the, you know, negotiations of this. It's sentences, Susie. It's not even like it's a huge element of the bill. This is negotiating on sentences and how specific they are to ensure that they are so tight that there isn't any grounds for any intelligence agent ever to say, oh, well, that wasn't very clear. Or, you know, well, we can give them this much, but we don't have to give them all of this. And that's, you know, that it defeats the object if it isn't watertight. But I am concerned that, you know, all of the people that have been working so hard, even last week, you know, we had meetings on behalf of Hillsborough Law Now with ministers within the government about moving forward, and now we're in yet another position of uncertainty. And I feel really bad for Keir, because honestly, I know that people aren't as fortunate as I am to have met him on multiple occasions. You are right. He is a genuinely kind, caring, compassionate man who is deeply loyal to the Labour Party. And I've got no doubt whatsoever that when he made those pledges, he had every intention of fulfilling the bill. But it's the people around him that are stopping this from happening. And that is incredibly frustrating, that those same people have now turned on him. And you know, ultimately, that's why he's had to resign. It's such a shame.
Yeah, I just have to hope maybe that if there's a Prime Minister that has a stronger position in their party, even if only temporarily, they've got the authority to push something through. Well, time will tell, won't it, in that matter. Unfortunately, no matter what happens to Hillsborough Law, it will be too late for nuclear veterans. It will be for future scandals, not previous ones. So we also have to hope that Andy Burnham or whoever can find some sort of solution to that. Thank you. We've gone on far too long, but thank you both so much for joining me today. Next time, I hope John will be back with us. And as I said earlier, we hope to be speaking to the man whose legal battle against the British state led to the creation of Merlin in the first place. So do join us then. Till next time, everybody, thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye. This podcast series is part of the Nuclear Justice Research Project based at the University of Liverpool. Funded by Research England's Policy Fund, the project is a collaboration between the Centre for People's Justice and the Department of History, investigative reporter Susie Boniface and LabRats International. All historic images are Crown copyright and reproduced under the Open Government Licence. With thanks to Dr. Jonathan Hogg, Susie Boniface, Sarah Jane Stroud, Michael Bayliss and the team of students.